Matthew Cowley recently completed his master's degree in strength and conditioning from Loughborough University and has a degree in sport and exercise science from the University of Worcester. Matthew is currently working full-time as a strength and conditioning coach with Tonbridge Juddians rugby team. Matthew is an ex-student that Lewis and I used to teach, and it will be great to hear about his journey in international schools and moving on to university. So welcome to the show, Matthew. It's great to see you again.
Hello, good morning. Hope you guys are well. Yeah, no, I'm thoroughly enjoying it. Love seeing you guys again. Two of my best mentors.
That's early. You peaked early there, Cowley. Hey, we're going to have a conversation today about a number of different things around, obviously, your international schooling, your background, and this idea of being a third culture kid. And I know that when Mr. Dunstan, Alan, to our listeners, spoke to you about coming on the pod a little while ago, it sparked a conversation, didn't it, with your dad around your experiences and being a third culture kid. Tell us a little bit about that conversation.
Yeah, so when I got that invite and I saw the outline of what this podcast would be, I sort of really didn't understand the concept of being a third culture kid because it never was made apparent to me. I never really thought about it in sort of an in-depth way. So when I brought it across my dad, he did bring up some challenges that I would have faced or some sort of topics or themes that I never really had a conversation about or never really processed in my mind. So from that conversation, I did realize that there were challenges and I did think, okay, how did I come across them? And it just did spark a bit of conversation with him and I that I could bring on to here.
And before we get into the specifics of that, tell us a little bit about your background and your journey and what your third sort of culture feels are.
So my mum's Spanish and my dad's South African, but I haven't lived in any of those countries. I was born in England, lived here for 10 years, then flew out to Philippines for my dad's job, did the rest of my schooling there, so from year 6 to year 13. And then once I finished that, then I came back to England for university.
And you're at university now?
Just finished.
Tell us a little bit about your experiences at uni.
Yeah, no, it was quite daunting going from such a nice sort of.
The bits that you can share, the bits that you can tell.
I've got a PR that's going crazy right now. But yeah, apart from like I had a padded background going from school into university, and then once arriving here, I was sort of on my own. So just really just trying to understand what I can do, can't do, how do I get things done without having anyone to help me really. Even in terms of like actually getting a bike or trying to sort out bedding, even that sort of stuff was difficult because it's stuff I've never had to even think about doing. And other people I'd speak to, they'd say, oh, well, my parents got that for me. It all sort of arrived with them. Whereas just coming here by myself, it was a bit daunting in the sense that even just getting work done, you'd have to, if you failed, you'd fail. Or if you didn't understand a topic, you had to take your own initiative or be proactive about that and then get to know more about it. Whereas in BSM, there was already relationships you've built from year 6 onwards. So yeah, a bit difficult in that sense.
I know we'll get to talk about as we go, including BSM, British School Manila, and including relationships. But you've hit a really probably important part there really early on, Matthew, in talking about that sort of support element and that sort of team that were behind you in the Philippines. And I think it's probably worth putting into context, Alan, about how very much help there is available in the Philippines, both from an education point of view and what BSM provided, undoubtedly, but also from a home point of view. Now, would you explain to us, Matthew, the sort of home help you have in the Philippines and the sort of privileges that you might have had there that you don't have in the UK?
So starting off, I think, so we had a maid and a driver. So, waking up in the morning, you'd basically have breakfast ready for you, or, you'd have the driver just waiting to take you to school and back from school. And then once you got back, your room was sort of made. My dad did still try and make sure I was the one that was cleaning up my room, but sometimes I'd obviously have the little slip up. But yeah, it was sort of everything was catered for you. You didn't have to really take responsibility in the sense that, I didn't have to get the car started. Luckily, it was warm out there. But if it was, icy conditions or something, I didn't have to sit there with the air conditioning on, the heater on. But yeah, it was just, you didn't really have to take much responsibility. You didn't have to be organized as much because you knew you could have someone that would do it for you. So say if I didn't make my bed that morning and I had to rush to school because I was late, the driver would get me there, and then my maid would clean my bed or clean my room whilst I was gone. And yeah, I don't want to put my dad in the mud here. He definitely made me do it a couple of times and definitely made me learn from it and get punished by it. But yeah, so going from that and then to uni was a massive difference, because if you were late, then you weren't allowed in the lecture room. Then you had to get there and rush there yourself. So yeah, you sort of had to, you just realize that you're the one that you have to rely on now. You can't be relying on other people to pick up after yourself.
It's an interesting concept, and I have conversations with Zach and Gracie all the time about this, about stacking, about doing those little things like making your bed and picking the clothes off the floor, putting it in the wash basket. It's like,
did it work? Did it have any effect?
No, because obviously the cleaning fairy comes around and it like magically all goes back to normal when you come back from school, and it's exactly what you just described, Matt.
It's ridiculous. Yeah, no, just it's ridiculous, because now if someone's around my place and they just put their shoes in the wrong spot or put a glass somewhere, I lose my head. Absolutely. So it's a nice big contrast. And I have realized that in the past, now even now I've got wake up at 8 a.m. or make the bed. I've got little tasks I set for myself that I never would have even thought of doing when I was in the Philippines.
I think it's worth, Matt, just going back here and defining what a third culture kid is. I've got this excellent book for our listeners who are watching on YouTube as well. It's about third culture kids, because there's a lot of studies on this now, and I think you alluded to earlier that you didn't really know about it, and I think that was probably a failure of our school at that time, that we didn't make you aware of the label that was attached to you, so you could actually just process that and realize that you are unique in the sense of going to uni. You're probably about 1% of people you will encounter have had the lifestyle that you had. Can I just
make a teacher comment at that juncture?
Well,
we probably did explain it. Matthew wasn't listening.
Yeah, we'll come on to that later, Matt. I've got a report of yours from a few years ago that you'll like to read out. No, so according to the lady here, Dr. Etty Zilbar, so she uses this definition here of a third culture kid. It's a person who has spent a significant part of his or her development years outside the parent's culture. So the third culture kids builds relationships to all of the cultures while not having full ownership in any. Although elements from each culture are assimilated into the third culture kid's life experience, the sense of belonging is in relationship to others of a similar background. It's interesting, that, isn't it? When you read that.
Yeah.
What do you take from that, Matthew, in terms of the key points?
Well, I mean, a big part I remember learning in school was being like patriotic. I remember Mr. Atwood in geography learning about being patriotic and how it was dying out, say, in countries in like Singapore. And just hearing that, I never actually thought about this until this podcast came about, that I actually never lived in, say, Spain or South Africa, in any of my parents' home countries. And even in England, I lived here 10 years and then had to pack up and go when I was at a big point of sort of developing. So like at 10 years old, I had to move country and then start my life new, and make new relationships. So back then, I wouldn't even say that I was English, because I was just 10 years. That's not even half your life or a quarter. So then I had to go to Philippines, a new country, and even now I wouldn't consider that my home, because like I'm back in England now. So would this be my home? And I have had challenge, where am I from? I always say, oh, well, I'm half this, half that, but I've never lived in any of those countries. So then I don't really have like a true country I identify myself with. Like I don't have an identity really in that sense. So it is a weird sort of thought that I've never really sort of like gone in depth with.
It's interesting because third culture kids, when you ask that question, where you're from, it's like a paragraph.
Yeah.
When you ask me, like, where am I from? I'll say I'm from Sheffield.
Yeah.
I've got a sense of identity because I spent 26 years there growing up, and that's where I'm from. I've got a distinct identity. I was born there,
yeah,
etc. But with a third culture kid, as I say, it's a paragraph. I mean, you said earlier it depends on what the audience is, but Go on, have a go at it. Where are you from, Matthew?
Yeah, I'd say half well, quarter Cuban because my grandpa's Cuban, quarter Spanish, and then half South African. Um, but yeah, I was born in England. That's what I'd say.
And you lived X amount, how many years? 8 years in the Philippines.
Yeah,
So
8 years in the Philippines.
At that point, do you get a feel for the person as to whether they want to actually continue in a really long conversation about where you're from, or whether they just think, I was just being polite, I'm not really that interested? I suppose you find out who's actually interested right from the start there, don't you?
Yeah, no, it sounds just like a massive long gap year conversation, doesn't it? That they don't want to hear about. But yeah, no, it is strange, and over the years, I have sort of just, with people that I'm just meeting, I have just said, oh yeah, I just did a couple of school years in Philippines. Like I don't really go in depth of everything that I've done or where my parents are from. Sometimes I just say England just to speed up the conversation because, that conversation, if it were to happen, would happen down the line if we do become friends, or it's you don't want to hit them with a long paragraph for the first time meeting them because that conversation will just be incredibly short after that. But yeah, it is strange.
Too deep, too quick. So tell us a little bit about your parents, Matthew. So your mum was from Spain and your father South Africa.
Yeah. They met in England, and I was born. Then they got tired of me, so then my little brother came along, and then we moved out to Philippines 2010. Then 2015, they had a divorce, and so then my little brother and my mum came back to England, and I stayed in the Philippines with my dad, to carry on my schooling. Really, I think I was in the middle of my GCSEs or just starting. I'm not sure.
End of year 9, Matt. I remember.
Oh, okay. What was that when my grades picked up, was it? But yeah, no, so that happened, and then I guess that brought some different challenges. But yeah, just sort of.
It will have brought different challenges, of course. Anybody who's come from a home where there's a divorce has happened, it does have a big impact. Thinking back now, do you understand or feel the impact that had on you? You've mentioned already you're in maybe a country that's relatively new to you. The sort of continuity that you've always had of mum and dad in England, that was taken away in terms of moving to the Philippines, and then obviously the home of mum and dad together was taken away in 2015. Looking back now, do you recognise the impact or the challenges that you faced?
One thing I do realise is that if it would have been a lot harder if I was in England per se, because having a driver or a maid eliminates the sort of gaps where your mum's cooking, for example. I didn't really miss that because I'd have food, or I'd have someone there when I get home whilst my dad was at work. I'd have someone there that would just help me around the house, or I say help me around the house, but help around the house. But yeah, no, so that sort of area, there was no sort of gap because that was filled up by the maid, by the driver, driving me to school and then taking me back. But yeah, no, having someone who was actually like, your mother, there were little gaps of that. So like I couldn't have the hard conversations I could with, I'd always have to rely on my dad for that. Whereas it would have been nice to have like someone else to talk to, if you get where I'm coming from. But yeah, no, it was difficult at times. But I guess a big part of, having a maid helped, having a driver helped, but also just because I was so heavily invested into sports, that sort of just took my mind away from it, or any emotions that I did have. I know the common saying is you can leave it all on the field. I would leave it in training, just on match days as well. So I guess I kept myself busy so that I didn't have to actually really have to think about that. But yeah.
It was in sport, really, wasn't it? Just from an observer's point of view. Obviously, Alan and I were both we both taught you, we both coach you, but what you've just said there resonates. You did lose yourself in sport. That's where you found a lot of your belonging and relationships. Would that be accurate?
Yeah. Made a lot of friends. Even at uni, that was just a quick way to. I mean, those are where I made my friends the whole 3 years, and then 1 year at Loughborough. It was just through sport, integrating it in different sports, and then social nights.
Tell us about the importance of sport in your life, Matthew.
Well, I mean, think it's pretty important because I'm basing my whole career off it. So, yeah, I just, I think it was instilled in me from a very young age. Playing different sports. My mum used to swim for Spain, so she got me into swimming pretty quickly. She tried with a water birth, but that didn't work. But yeah, and then my dad, rugby, he loved athletics as well. So then, I'd be running since I was like, I can't remember what age, but yeah. So throughout the years, I'd always be trying different sports and then going at say rugby, football. Yeah, just I mean that's the way I made friendships. That's helped me adapt in so many different scenarios where I was a bit nervous. That I could just go to a rugby social club at Worcester, and then that's where I've met the people that I lived with for the next 3 years. And then even after uni, coming back to here where everyone is still doing their other things around, where I used to live. I thought, where can I meet people? Now I'm strength and conditioning at a rugby club, so I've got a couple new mates there, and even the gym I go to where I'm doing a bit of, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I've got a couple mates there now. So it's just helped me have a nice little sort of, I don't know what it could be called, like a social tree of different friends around the area, all through sport. Whereas I genuinely would have no clue how to meet other people if it wasn't for sport. As well as just, a common theme around about now is, just getting into the gym, losing all those emotions that you built up across the day. That's the way sport has allowed me to deal with emotion, to sort of let out all the stresses in my life.
So it's interesting you talk about that, and you probably reflect upon your school time now and think, yeah, sport was my outlet. And I want to just touch upon your best memories at school. And we hear a lot. We're both deputy heads now in a senior school where we see a lot of the exam pressures, particularly at the IB diploma. Now, how did sport help you with coping with those pressures? You talked about taking away the emotions. What else did it do for you?
The way it helped me, I think it was the fact that I could never sit down and study for longer than 10 minutes, but we'll say an hour.
I remember you say CPE, Matt. I remember.
The practical was fine, but the theory was something to look at. But yeah, no, it was sport really allowed me to have that break in between studying, or have that break in between learning, and allow me to process what has happened, then have a nice break where I'd let all, the bunched up excitement or stress, just let it all out. And then I'd come back and sit with a new slate and a new relaxed mind that would then help process what I'm trying to learn. And I think, yeah, it was just, if it wasn't for sport, I can't imagine myself sitting down, having a different hobby and then being able to study and learn differently. Because even now, I remember my exams at Worcester. In the exam room, I'd just be thinking of different ways, like I know the questions relate to sport, but it would talk about muscles, and I'd actually have to kinetically move to think about the answer. Like what muscle would be used in this sort of movement. I'd have to do that whole movement to then process what was the muscle. So yeah, it's just an array of different things.
Handstands in the middle of the exam hall.
So tell us, Matt, what were some of those best memories then that you had of your time in Manila at school and going through your GCSEs and IB?
I mean, it was always a good laugh.
Class, Matt.
Pardon?
So you started in that maths class, was it? They're your best memories?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the best memories, it was always a good laugh hearing Aldo get shouted at the top of your lungs. That was a good memory. But no, I think it was it'd have to be that Phuket trip, the Phuket Sevens trip. Going abroad all the way to Phuket with a bunch of your mates that you play football with, and then having staying in a lovely hotel, nice resort, and then pardon?
Yeah, it was a belter, wasn't it? 5-star resorts. You don't get that now being a student, do you?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was amazing. And then, just playing football, winning, going through like winning phases and also losing phases. I remember that final. I mean, Ewan and I still talk about it. One of my teammates, and obviously you guys taught him, Ewan and I. We talk about it so many times when we lost that final against BISP Phuket, I think was their name. just when they completely outplayed us. It was ridiculous. You know, normally I just go in there charging, throwing my body around, but they just play the ball right round us and they'd be gone before I even knew where they were. But yeah, even Isaac, you know, just you understand so much looking back at it now, how to deal with different sort of scenarios, like one trying to come back from a big loss, you know, a bit of adversity there, or winning all these matches, you know, 4-0, 5-0, then the next day trying to turn up and still have that same mindset of winning to get through the grit and win. And I think Phobia as well. You just meet so many different people. I mean, like I remember meeting a couple people from I can't remember, Shanghai, a school in Shanghai, just at university now, and it's just ridiculous. So you could think, oh, I've actually met this person when I was 13 in a completely different country, and now we're both at university in England. It's quite surreal. So it just shows, you know, you make some friendships in a completely different country, and you know you can get back together after and just start talking. So it is quite surreal, and it's all through sport. So yeah, I think sport is where my life is at.
It's amazing to listen back on that. It triggers so many memories for me as well, Matthew. And yeah, we had some great times on those trips, and it's those memories that last a lifetime. As I say, it's not the ones where you generally sat down doing some writing that you remember, is it? It's the trips, it's the sense of belonging that's created through that. What give us some negatives though there. So they're the best things. What's the worst things about being a third culture kid then, or being in an international school and then maybe trying to assimilate into the UK?
Yeah, first negative from those 2 trips was trying to explain the name Sheriff Cowley to people, but that'll be the first negative. But yeah, no, a negative of going from Philippines or going from an international school to England university was, there was a negative in the sense that I couldn't really, you know, everyone by the time I was there, majority of people were already driving. So they would be able to drive around, whereas I'd rely on my bike to get me to, you know, 30-minute bike ride to get me if I needed to get there, because I'd never learned to drive in the Philippines. So, you know, I mean, even my girlfriend, she could drive. So it was a bit of a wake-up call when she was driving me around for a year to then actually, you know, I need to start getting my license. But yeah, it was quite difficult in the sense that I couldn't really relate to anyone. You know, they'd be talking about their upbringing. They would talk about their upbringing, you know, 16 going sixth form, you know, going down to Tesco to get a meal deal, you know, in between lessons. But I never really related to that. It was just sort of like the trips they'd go on was just down the street, or just, you know, north of England, they go to Peak District or something like that. Whereas, you know, I was lucky enough to go to, say, Phuket for a football trip. It was, and if I did bring up, it was at those times when I did bring up those trips, then they'd just be like, "Oh, sorry," you know, they'd make all the comments, and then, you know, I'd suddenly be labelled as that guy, which I never intended to be. So it was quite strange, because, you know, these trips weren't as special in Philippines, but when you look back at it now, you realise actually my upbringing was amazing. I got to experience all these different things, and even those conversations with my mates at uni led me to realise that Ruben never got to go on those trips. So my little brother, he actually never got to experience that. So seeing the trips he went on before, you know, unconsciously, I'd be like, oh, well, I used to go on these trips. And then you know, I didn't realize, obviously, there's some limitation, like boundaries between there. So it is quite interesting to actually process it all now, and understand that, you know, going through those different scenarios, learning and finding out that, yeah, you can't relate to anyone as much as anyone else. So going back to sport, that's how I linked up with people. And if it wasn't for that, I don't think I would be able to relate to anyone else.
That's a really good point. And I'm just looking back at the definition is, in terms of relationships, you can relate to others that have been in a similar background to you. So your likes of Ewan and people like that, who you were still in contact with Kyler, and the people who went to uni in the UK but had a similar background to you, compared to those that, yes, if you'd have come to my university and you'd have started telling me about going to Shanghai and Phuket, it would have been, oh, he's a fancy one, this one, isn't he? He's big time, this lad. How did you deal with that though? Did you actually feel different? And like, did you feel you had to contain that, or did you felt you were able to talk about it? Or how did you then try and fit in? Did you get into a drink culture just to try and fit in? What did you do, and how did you feel?
Yeah, I think I didn't really have any of those conversations unless I was with the couple lads, the six lads that I lived with at uni. I didn't bring it up, in the first sort of conversation. I only brought it up when I was comfortable with those people, because after the first experiences of bringing that out, it didn't go down so well. So then I thought, you know what, I
What
might just
happened, Matt? What happened
pardon?
first time you brought it out?
Well, it was at a rugby social, and you have to like sort of give a background. Um, yeah, yeah, brilliant. What a time! What a shock! I didn't know this. So I stood up and then told everyone the story. And yeah, that just it was a white t-shirt social, which then I didn't have a t-shirt by the end of the night, so that got ripped up, and I was soaked. I've still got pictures of that night on my phone. Um, but yeah, it didn't go down so well. So I just sort of reserved conversations for that in the future. Um, and it was quite difficult because I'd have to, in those conversations, I'd just take a step back and just hear what other people had to say, and then I wouldn't say my part. I'd just be like, oh yeah, I went on a couple trips. I didn't explain, oh, I went here and I went here. Um, which was kind of difficult because I didn't get to sort of express my excitement and share it with others. I'd have to be reserved quite many times. Um, so yeah, in that sense, it was quite daunting. And it was a shame because I wouldn't be able to relate to anyone, and yeah, that's it really.
Oh, damn it. It is. And Matthew's made a really interesting point, and I'm sort of glad I waited because I was going to bring this up earlier. But I think we're talking about self-awareness, Matthew, aren't we? We're talking about being able to put ourselves in those situations of how we're received by others. And you talked earlier about how sport has been a central part in your life. After answering a couple of very, very guided questions towards whether it was or not. And then you talked about how that's allowed you to be much more sociable and the confidence it's given you to go and speak to people in the local clubs, in the gyms, at university. But I remember from school, and I know Alan mentioned the sort of report that he's going to talk about. But one of the strengths that you really had was you were a leader. You were somebody who sort of got things done. If you wanted something to get done in a sporting context or in a practical context, you could rely on Matthew to get it done because you were a good talker. You connected with people well. You could empathize with people well. You were a team player and you were somebody who other people looked up to. When did you realize that? When did you harness the power of that? Is that something that you're still working out now?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's something I'm still trying to work out now because I mean, even you guys telling me this or the countless millions conversations I had with my dad, telling me that I was special, that I did have something going for me, that I could lead in different senses. I just never really listened to it. I just went, yeah, yeah, yeah. He's just trying to build up my confidence. I just never really sat down and thought about it. And yeah, in some instances on the field, I did realize that I could lead, with or without the captain's armband. Like I just still sort of did realize I could push people or try to bring the best out of other people, um, even if it meant I couldn't bring the best out of myself sometimes. I just, yeah, it's still something I'm trying to comprehend and trying to use as a strength nowadays. Because I mean, a recent challenge I've had was getting in a rugby team where some of them are ex-professional players that have been around doing this, playing rugby for years on end, and then some are quite new, trying to actually get my voice out to them and trying to make them listen to me, trying to have a bit of authority, has been quite difficult. So I've been trying to use elements that from football pitches, from different practical environments, trying to use that into this now to then realize, okay, I can use my strengths in this scenario, which would be sort of team leading and trying to get everyone on my side.
Talking as well, talking. You're very eloquent. You're coming across really impressively in our conversation today, Matthew. And you're clearly a reflective person who's taken time to think about these things. Can you identify where that started to happen at school? Were you able to reflect at school and develop and improve from those reflections, or were you a bit too busy back then? Is that something that happened a little bit later?
Yeah, there were elements of that. I'd say starting of IB, that's when I had Mr. Dunson, I had you as mentors, I had Mr. Mann as a mentor that sort of I'd have conversations with. I mean, you guys spoke to my dad multiple times where I was lacking in different academic areas. So from those conversations, I did realize, okay, I've got to pick myself up in these areas, and that sort of sparked the self-awareness and reflective route, then for university, where, you know, going to the first year, I mean, the first year was kind of a miss, but the next couple of years, that's when it sort of took flight. And then now I think I'm just being reflective in so many different types of my career, really, you know, just being reflective in my coaching, sitting in the car afterwards, understanding where I went wrong, where I could have gone better, and then also just trying to further my career. Who can I speak to that would help me in different areas? So it sort of has come, like, it started in, I'd say, IB, where, you know, elements of that conversation was made apparent to me, where and now it's sort of settling in, and I'm trying to use that as a strength, trying to use that as a way I can better myself in, you know, as I said, career wise, but also as a person. So I don't think it has fully settled in yet, but I'm trying to get it started up.
There's probably a bit of determination in there as well. I don't know if I've mentioned this to you. I remember really clearly my first lesson that I had at BSM. It was a year 9 class, and you were in it with Ewan and with a few other people you talked about. And for some reason, like it's absolutely criminal now, but for some reason, it was the first lesson, and it was really important that we did some sort of cardiovascular test to see where everyone was. This is a sign of how far PE's come and how far my practice has come since then. So you're in year 9, you're part of a group, and you did the bleep test. And I remember you quite easily won the bleep test. It was you and someone else, probably Ewan, as the last 2 students. But you only got to about a level 9 or something. And I remember coming off, you were like laughing and smiling. And you were like, I could do miles better than that, but I've just, you know, I've not really done anything all summer. And I came out of the lesson, and a couple of PE teachers asked me how people had gone on. And I told them the result. And they basically said, oh, they're taking a piss out of you, those kids. That's criminal. They're just thinking they can get away with that. We need to hold them to higher expectations. And I remember just the way that you sort of started to show that bit more willing and that bit better attitude as those lessons went on, with a number of other students as well. And then how that started to transfer into the football that you were getting into. You know, by your own admission, you really enjoyed sort of playing rugby and being physical, but football was something that you were still learning. And I remember those first few sessions in the football and seeing that there could be a sort of athlete here and somebody who could really go on to lead. And that doesn't happen just because people poke you and prod you and tell you that you're quite good. That happens because you've made a conscious effort. When did that conscious effort start to happen? When did you start to think, hang on a minute, I really enjoy this, and there's some people trying to help me, I'm going to crack on and do well?
Yeah. I think it was like I'd say GCSE time, when I was starting my, you know, doing a PE theory and then the practical element as well. I sort of understood that actually academic is not my area of expertise. You know, there's different ways that I can get the best out of myself from. And yeah, from that, I just understood that, you know, I took those opportunities, say the bleep test, where I knew I was better than others, that's where I'd be able to express myself the most, and I'd be able to, you know, understand that, okay, I was better at people in these areas, which is when sort of it clicked in my mind, you know, when I was doing the practicals in PE, picking up, say, rounders, or, you know, the swimming, the, you know, survival swimming, doing all of that stuff. I did find that picking all of that up a lot easier than others, and that's when it sort of resonated with me that I was sort of better in that area, which made me, okay, I understand that I'm better here. And then conversations with you and Mr. Dunstan, and I said Mr. Mann as well, also made me realize, okay, I do need to pick up those areas, but I think I found a niche that works well for me. And even if it meant, you know, when I was studying, I remember I had a football, a little ball, a rugby ball, or a little ball in my hand. I'd be chucking that up just to keep myself concentrated, but also moving at the same time, which would help me then focus. So I understand that through those conversations, it definitely 100% allowed me to understand myself in ways that I could probably never have thought of until like university time. So as well as having a good padding, I think that did set me on understanding or highlighting where I wanted to be in life, what my expertise were, what niche I was going to go to, which led me in through the sporting route, and that then led me into strength and conditioning. And if it wasn't for those conversations, I think I would probably still be struggling to, you know where I am, essentially.
So sports become your identity, really, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I love the expression planting trees that you never see grow. We're fortunate now, having taught you in year 9 all the way through to being 18 years old, and now as a 22-year-old, we're actually seeing that tree flourish. And it'll be interesting in another 10 years' time to see where you're at then. But looking back on it, the work we did, I see a brilliant young man in front of me now, and I feel proud. Yeah. I feel really proud that all that time that we spent with you is resulting in this. And yeah, I could get quite emotional about that. It's amazing, really, to see what a great young man you are. But I want to read you your report. I found a report. I'm going to listen to it.
Not so great.
It's not bad. You just interpret it how you wish.
Yeah.
What do you reckon?
I think the key to things like this is what these things don't say that might be illuminating.
Tell you what, this is going to be an interesting part of that tree you planted.
Here we go. I think this was probably from year 10 or 11, not from your IB years. So here we go. You've got Matthew is an enthusiastic, sociable, and practical young man who enjoys sport and excels outside the classroom. Matthew would benefit from listening more in class and getting his homework finished on time. How good is that? Listening back.
I would like to say I've changed, but yeah, still elements of that still in me. I was told never to change, that I was always unique. So I thought I'd keep going. But yeah, no, that is, oh wow. At least there was no numbers next to that. That's okay.
Yeah, so that's interesting, isn't it? Because we talk about schools not a fit for everybody. And you're flourishing now, whereas school might not necessarily be a great fit for you. You're so practical. So the traditional sit down scenario, not ideal. It might have done you some real good. But the key to it is you're finding your way, isn't it? And could you give any advice then to people similar to you who are going to be going through GCSEs and IB diploma? How would you advise them to get through that and really try and flourish in them preceding years or post-seeding years?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, they'll be doing IB, which compared to A levels, branches you out to 6 different subjects and then 3 extracurricular activities, which, I mean, if I did A levels, I don't think I would have had that exposure that I would have had that I got from IB, which allowed me to understand where my niche was, where I wanted to be. So if my advice would be just to branch out to as many different opportunities that come across your way. And if there are some that you don't really agree with or that aren't in your comfort zone, really, I mean, the common expression, get outside of your comfort zone. I mean, I had to do that multiple times, forcefully, and it just allowed me to really, it allowed me to sort of, as you said, flourish, use that word there, which I think, it did allow me to flourish, and which then allowed me to understand a bit more about who I was and what I like doing and how I can make that into a career. And if it wasn't for me being put in those difficult scenarios, or if it wasn't for me being exposed to those different subjects, going from GCSE PE then to do biology in IB, that really put 2 sort of sciences together, which then allowed me to do sport and exercise science, funny enough. And yeah, if it wasn't for all those different areas I branched out to, then I wouldn't have failed at those areas and then gone back a step, then made 2 steps forward, which massively helped. So I think don't be afraid to fail is another thing I'd say. Because
I'm just going to come on to that, Matt, because how important is failure there? It's almost a taboo word, isn't it? Like, we set up the younger generation. You have all your backup at home. We, as parents, they're helicoptering over the top, making sure that failure is really comfortable. How important is it to have some failure as you're going through those years? And
yeah,
you know what I mean? You experienced it. Tell us.
Yeah, thank you. I did experience failure. Yeah, I mean, my dad made apparent that I did fail a couple of times, and he did threaten to take sport away from me, which thankfully, to a discussion you had with him, Mr. Dunstan, that didn't happen. And I think he said he learned from that as well, from conversations we've had in the past. He said that he's glad that he never took sport away from me, because I didn't excel in, say, 5 out of the 6 subjects that I had, but in that one subject, which I ended up making my career out of, I did excel at. And from having those failures, I did understand, even though I put in the work, I just didn't really enjoy it, and there was no other way about it. I'd get the grade necessary to pass, but other than that, there was no spark there. Whereas that one subject that I found that spark for is the one that allowed me to go forward with. So having failed in different areas allowed me to actually be self-aware, to reflect on what has just happened, and then to process it, and then to go on to the next step. So, taking one step backwards and then two forwards is I mean, it's just the best way to go. Otherwise, you'll never learn, as you say, from your mistakes, and you'll never be able to better yourself and improve yourself.
The mention of comfort zone there is interesting, because you've not only sort of gone out of your comfort zone, but you've actually been in an ugly zone, haven't you, for quite a bit of it. We've acknowledged between us that, you didn't particularly enjoy the academic side of IB in many ways, which is such a paradox now to the person that you are: an academic, a bachelor's degree holder, a master's student, and a strength and conditioning coach, a podcast host, and a successful young man. So there's a journey through that you've already said, in terms of self-awareness and reflection, that now that looking back, there were things that you were made to do almost, and guided to do, that were for your own benefit, that you couldn't see at the time. That must have been really frustrating for you, to be spending time in that ugly zone, feeling like you didn't enjoy it, feeling like it wasn't something that you wanted to do. But now you're seeing those benefits of that. What advice would you give your sort of 16, 17-year-old self?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I'd say, obviously, yeah, good question. I'd say, obviously, try your best, and if it doesn't work out, just try the next thing. I just say, use every step that you take as a means to progress, and even if it's a step that you fall into, get back up and then progress on to the next one. You're not just going to have a easy coast to the next step. You're going to have to work for that step. So, you can't just always have like a full. You can't always have like a padded fall. You need something hard to knock you on your ass, essentially, and get back up. You can't just coast through everything. So I definitely, is it Rocky that says just roll with the punches? I'd definitely use that as a good one.
Yeah, it's a good one. I know a lot of international students do have it soft, don't they? They have it they don't really have that hard landing.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's all very comparative.
Yeah.
Like Matthew's talked really well about that idea of home help you had in the Philippines and drivers, but that doesn't replace your mother in your context. Yeah. So there was challenges there that you had that are absolutely parallel to people all over the world. But they're in a different context. You had challenges, how you felt at school, and you wanted to do some subjects but not the other. There are parallels all over the world. People want to make choices, and young people do. And one of the difficulties that I think the teaching profession has is how much agency you give children. If we were to give you a choice when you were 16, 17, I'm sure that there'd have been things that you would have chosen not to do that would now have really been detrimental to the career that you've got. But because at times you were guided strongly and sternly by a group of people that wanted the best for you and that had your best interests at heart, that was your ugly zone moment. That was the time where you were finding that difficult, but you're reaping the rewards now. And I wonder where that balance is. How much choice would you have wanted? Do you think that it was right choice you had? Would you have wanted more, maybe at the time, but not now?
That's the strange thing, because I talk about my situation, how I now can reflect on it and say, like, I enjoyed the failure because it made me who I am today, which I'm comfortable with. But whereas other people excelled at just studying, and they love what they're doing now. So it's always, it made me 100% realize that we are all unique. Because say someone else who didn't go through that hardship, or did go through a hardship in their own sort of context, actually resulted in them excelling in their own niche. So it's so difficult to see if it's sort of nature or nurture, which is something we're discussing in the sporting world. If it's better to nurture someone through and guide someone through their sort of schooling areas to then progress onto a career that they choose, or if it's better to let nature sort themselves out and let them go through the process of failing, and then finding themselves. And it's just that balance you want to guide someone, but not guide them so strongly that you're sort of imposing your own views on them and beliefs, where you're guiding them into a situation that you wanted to go to or that you believe is correct, but then doesn't resonate with that person themselves.
What's the key to that, Matthew? How do you do that?
Sure, when I have my own child, I'll figure it out. I probably won't figure it out then. But I think that I'm really not sure because I don't even know myself what worked. I think it's just you've got to have a balance of both, where I, my dad being hard on me, my teachers being hard on me. I think that was a great part, and I thoroughly, I am grateful and appreciate the hardship that was imposed on me. Um, and I mean, I guess it's a big balance because I'm lucky to be where I am now in the sense that I do enjoy what I'm doing. I know sort of whereabouts, the career I want to be at, the person I want to be in a couple years time, and then a couple years time after that. So I'm really not sure. I don't think there is an answer. You just gotta, what is it, like a little test on. You gotta just test and trial it out.
I think that's a really good. I think that point is probably different for everyone,
completely,
and it probably depends on the relationships.
Yeah, I just wrote down a point here, Matthew. I think a lot of your strength and a lot of the places you now are in are due to the relationships that was cultivated. And you alluded to earlier the nickname Sheriff. Yeah, Sheriff Cowley came from my kids, didn't it? It was Zach and Grace were watching Disney Junior, and there was a cartoon on it with Sheriff Cowley, and then that was it. It was Sheriff. And you didn't realise at the time how much of a powerful role model you were in school to the younger generation.
You're young and loved him.
Oh, my Zach. If he was, I could get him down now. After we finish the pod, I'll bring him down. He'll absolutely love it. He's a big strapping lad now. But you were a role model. And that's one of the things we were trying to really cultivate in him, wasn't it? Was that leadership and that ability to be a role model. And it didn't have to necessarily be in certain areas where you weren't strong, but we did see something in you that we thought, this guy can lead, this guy's a real people person. See, those relationships you had with us and with your other staff and with your friends, how important was that in your development, the relationships?
Yeah, I think it was around my final year at BSM, and elements of it actually in year 12, where I did realize that I was, one of the only kids to be able to talk to you guys or other members of staff comfortably in a way that that sort of, I was able to have conversations with you guys surrounding anything really, like if it was my dad just, give me a hard time, or even just struggling in different areas of school. I just, those relationships made me realize that I was able to talk to sort of profession, at a professional level, but then also talk to different people in the sense that, like, even though we didn't share the same views, I could also have conversations with them, and that did help me understand. I'm trying to think now, it did help me sort of think of different ways I could reach out to people and have those conversations with people and build those relationships. Because I mean, I was speaking to you guys, then speaking to the head teacher all the time, Mr. Mann, and then speaking to my mates, and then speaking to my mates from different schools, allow me to adapt my way of approaching people, and that really did massively help me go into university, where I had no clue about anyone. And by the end of my 3 years at Worcester, luckily it was quite a small uni, but I used to have I was able to talk to the teachers, talk to them about helping me in different areas, and then also making different friendship groups outside of sport as well. And I think, I mean, those having those relationships at quite a young age and being able to build them did help me later in life.
It's rapport, isn't it? The power of rapport. And you always had a good rapport with us. And I do remember the time when I think Mr. Keynes made you a captain and he got sent off. Remember that? The captain of the year.
There's plenty of mistakes along the way, wasn't there? On both those and him.
Yeah, but at that point, because you were so wanting to please and do well, you got a little bit overexcited with it, got sent off. But that didn't refrain from us seeing the potential in you to go and lead again. And obviously you were my captain later down the line for football. I think you were captain for the rugby, weren't you? It was incredible that you learned from those failures. But it was that rapport, wasn't it? We recognised that you needed a good rapport in order to go on and be successful. Sometimes students don't need that rapport. They just want to be taught and that's it. Whereas you felt You felt you needed to be cared for.
It's a good point.
You needed to be loved. You needed to have your arm around you. You would get the occasional bollocking, but it was when you needed it, wasn't it? You can probably you needed it at times, and then you needed an arm round. But we knew you and we cared for you, and I think that's what we talk about teaching, isn't it? Now it's students won't work for people who they feel don't care for them.
Yeah, yeah. That's especially in rugby now. Like I was speaking to the head coach a couple of weeks ago, and he agreed with that statement right there. If they'll be less inclined to reach out if they don't see me putting in the hard yards first, in the sense like caring for them, making sure that they know that I want them to get better in different areas of their performance and recovery. So yeah, I mean, I think it was seeing that that I had teachers around me to help me through things, not always negatively, actually helped me branch out a bit more and help me. I mean, I think help me positively in the sense that I did want to do better for them. In that sense, like I wanted to make you guys proud of what I could do, my abilities. So yeah, I think it is just letting those students know that you are there to help them and that you do care about their progression onto later years. You're not just there to teach them 1 year, then sack them off the next. Like you'll still be around there, even though you're not their main teacher. You'll still be there to help.
It's a good point, that, isn't it? Yeah, it's that sense of belonging. It all comes back to sense of belonging. Tell us, do you miss it, Matt? Do you miss all that now? 22, you've got your own life in the UK. Do you miss that international life?
Yeah, I miss being the big cheese, going around everywhere. I do, do miss it. I'll tell you what, I miss the prices. Going down and you pay six. I remember I invited my dad for his first beer. I think after my first year at uni. £6 a pint in London. I had to buy him £6 beer, fuming. Then I go to Philippines and he gives me like a 60 peso, like £1 pint. I don't think it was fair. Yeah, I do miss those prices, but yeah, I do miss the sort of trips I go on. Luckily, I mean, for example, in December, my dad, Ruben, and I were all going to Germany for Christmas holiday. So there's still elements of that, but in terms of university, I mean, yeah, you just nothing. The best trip you'd go on is like say to a trampoline park with your mates at 6 p.m. on a Sunday because you got nothing else to do. Like it was.
That right there, they're keepers.
But yeah, I think it's I don't know. I sort of enjoyed that like taking away the glamour side. I enjoyed being put in that position where you're bored with your mates. What do you do? You sit around the TV for the next 4 hours, go for a kickabout outside in the garden, then you're back in the TV. I sort of enjoyed that element. But do I wish imagine it? Yeah, I do think if we all went on a massive holiday together, how would that be? Go on a massive rugby tour, for example. So yeah, I do miss that side, but I do appreciate it a lot more not being there now.
A lot of third culture kids, Matthew, often follow in the footsteps and keep doing that as they become adults. Some, and if you remember Mr. Woolridge, the ex-service learning coordinator, his dad was a BBC correspondent, and Simon Woolridge followed in his footsteps and went all over the world. But his sister said, "That's me done. I don't want to get on a single plane ever again. I've done enough travelling to last a lifetime." So these extremes. Where do you think you'll fit there? Do you think you'll get that itch to go and take your profession and go overseas, or you think that now that's it, that this is my base and I want to set roots down? What's your thoughts?
Quite interesting. I had a conversation with my dad yesterday about this, and I was like, no, I definitely don't think this is me done. I was thinking about going to the US as rugby's peaking up there. Thinking about going to the US or New Zealand or even South Africa. All these different places that I dream of going. I definitely wouldn't say I guess because I'm a third culture kid. I don't feel that I'm tied down to say England. I'm not worried about leaving because I've left before, so it's not as daunting to me. It's quite an exciting sort of thought, me moving out there, living 2 years in the US, working there, then going off to the next adventure. So I don't see it as a means of my whole life's going to change. I see it as many adventures that I would love to go on, and I think it just helps not being tied down to one sort of country.
It's a really good point, Matt, and there's 3 bullet points from this book here that might fit really succinctly into where you think you might fit. Is the third culture kids are cultural chameleons who fit in everywhere and are able to hide their background. That's an interesting one. And I think you've demonstrated a little bit of that. There's then the screamer who shouts and demonstrates that they are different. Or then there's the wallflower who withdraws and observes from outside and doesn't invest to become part of their new culture. So very interesting there. And I think from what Matthew said, he's very much a cultural chameleon, isn't he? He fits in, but hides his background.
Sounds like he was a screamer for those first few rugby socials, and then he got told he shouldn't be a screamer,
and then became a wallflower. But interesting how it's been researched, and there's stuff out there for kids. And I think from our perspective, from this conversation today, I think we need to do more about helping third culture kids. I really do.
Yeah, it is weird to actually hear about those bullet points that you mentioned there and see how it does resonate with me. That it's actually written in a book and someone's actually identified that how I feel in a book. It is quite surreal, strange to actually hear that.
The fact that this is actually a book, Matthew. Yeah, we will read books. Is that right?
He's an academic.
He's an academic. Didn't recognise it. Oh, there's no pictures in there. No pictures in there. That's a shame.
That's brilliant. Love it. I love how you've still got that cracking sense of humour, and that's one of the things, the characteristics that we love so much about you. We're going to wind it down a bit, and we have a few questions that we like to do to finish off. The first one for me is 3 people. Then could be dead, alive, leaders, friends, whatever you want it to be. 3 people you'd go out for a drink with, have a meal with, and really learn from. Who would they be?
I definitely. Geez, it's hard not to name every teacher, but I definitely say you two. It'll be amazing to see you guys again. There you go, that's 2. No, it'll be definitely it would be amazing to just have a longer conversation. You know, like go for a drink and see how you guys are getting on. You know, enjoying your time in Riyadh, and then just I think it'll be amazing just to see you guys again. So that would be 2. Trying to think 1. I'd love to say an S&C coach that's further ahead of me, just as a contact, but I'll stick it with Mr. Mann, so it's not awkward. So we have a nice little catch up together.
He was here last week, Matthew. Actually, it was
really.
I'm still recovering.
Yeah, still walking around.
He's still 10 men. Yeah, he's still a great guy. Great guy. And Lewis, to finish.
Yeah, you've. There's so much that we've covered there, Matthew, and again, thank you for your time and the honesty that you've given us and the way that you've spoken so reflectively and eloquently about so many aspects of the difficulties you faced and some of the more light-hearted stuff and the fun as well. There's probably 2 that I'd go for. I think the first one is if you were to give advice to people in schools that are third culture kids, they exist all over the world. We've got many of them ourselves here in Riyadh. What advice would you give them from where you are
now? Don't be afraid to fail and just branch out. Take every opportunity that comes your way, even if you're scared of doing it, and even if you think you might fail at it, you never know, that could spark up a thought you never had before, which could then lead you into, bettering yourself and improving on yourself.
Do you know what? That's wonderful advice. We're going to leave it there. Let's finish on that. Matthew, tell us a little bit about your plans for the future, what you're going to be doing, and also tell us about your podcast. Where can people listen to your strength?
So I've got a podcast with David, a mate of mine from Loughborough, and it's about the Real Sports Science podcast. So if you just search up the Real Sports Science podcast on Spotify or RSS podcast, it should come up. And we basically just go talk about the sports news, different conversations surrounding strength and conditioning or physiology. And it is, we're getting some good guests on as well, which should be interesting. But yeah, I think a little bit about me, where I want to be. I want to be an S&C coach in an elite environment in rugby. My dream is to be the Springboks Sevens S&C coach, traveling the world with them to different destinations and, trying to get the best out of performance in such a grueling sport. So yeah, I want to build on my S&C profile. Want to always continue learning and adapting and delivering great coaching sessions. So yeah, that's where I want to be in the future.
You've said it out loud now. You've said it out loud, so you're accountable. South Africa coach. That's the.
Yeah.
I tell you what. Is the definition of infinite learning, isn't it? because he's had a struggle. He's going through his struggles, and now he's at a place where he knows where he wants to be, and he's on a journey to get there. I really love that about him.
Top man, Matthew. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.